There are 11 million members of defined benefit pension schemes in this country, covering £1.4 trillion worth of assets. On the one hand, that's good news for pension savers. That's a great deal of money and a lot of people, hopefully, with a reasonably comfortable retirement. On the other hand, that is a whale of a target for all sorts of individuals and groups of people who would like to arrange a circumstance where some of that money stuck to them. One of the areas of great concern with the FCA in recent weeks and months has been the subject of advising defined benefit scheme members to either remain in their scheme or to transfer out to an alternative scheme. And the recent fiasco at British Steel, which led to a great deal of people being advised to transfer out of their scheme when it possibly wasn't a very good thing to do, has brought the FCA to the consultation table. So now we have a situation where they are asking the industry how best to manage this situation where you have a conflict of interest. Why, I hear you ask, is there a conflict of interest? Well, this is going to get a little bit tedious, but bear with me because it's possibly your money we're talking about. This all surrounds a subject called contingent charging. And contingent charging simply means that whoever is advising you on this particular process to remain in your pension scheme or to move it to an alternative pension arrangement only charges you a fee if you take action to transfer it to an alternative arrangement, i.e. if you leave it where it is, you don't pay a fee and he doesn't earn any money. Fine, you might say, but that clearly gives rise to a conflict of interest because the individual concerned presumably needs to eat and therefore will be looking for ways to justify the advice to move you, possibly looking for ways. We have to be very careful that not everybody who's involved in contingent charging isn't playing the game, but without doubt recent events have shown that some are. The FCA therefore have come up with a slightly knee-jerk, certainly sledgehammer to crack a nut suggestion that they simply ban contingent charging. And what I would like to discuss is the be careful what you wish for outcome of that particular route, because banning stuff often has unintended consequences. When you have a business model which is based on contingent charging, and the FCA have made it quite clear that this is what they're looking at, those particular organisations that do nothing but advise on defined benefit to defined contribution transfers, they would argue that that business model is not viable unless a certain proportion of those individuals do go ahead and transfer. Therefore, you must be conflicted. If the revenue model for your business relies solely on individuals taking your advice and proceeding with the transaction, then if those individuals don't proceed down that route, you have no revenue, therefore you have no business. So we all understand that that's a problem, and the FCA are probably right in suggesting that there needs to be a solution to remove the conflict of interest from this marketplace. But as we touched on before, be careful what you wish for, because the alternative is for individuals who are members of final salary schemes to pay for the advice to stay put, as well as paying for advice to move. Unfortunately, what you're going to do there is immediately disenfranchise virtually all the lower earners in that area, but people who don't have significant liquid assets are very unlikely to pay £500 or £1,000 for a piece of advice that says, actually, we think it's best for you to stay where you are, or indeed, we think it's best for you to move, where the consequence of that may have significant long-term ramifications for them, but in the short term, they simply don't see value. And a little bit like the removal of the commission system under the Retail Distribution Review, what happens is people with less asset value, less liquidity, less pension savings, tend to get squeezed out of the advice market because only a certain group of people are willing and able to pay. My view is a bit more nuanced. The process of advising on a transfer or indeed staying put has a number of stages. And I think what you do is you attach the advice bill to each stage rather than the transaction as a whole. So you start with the initial overview, which is simply the advice on whether or not it might be a good idea to transact a transfer, which in itself is a higher level transaction than actually executing a transfer. And we're going to try and avoid jargon here, but it's a smaller bit of work and therefore requires a small amount of money. So I don't think it's impossible for a non-contingent charging model to charge a relatively small amount of money for an initial look, saying, yes, it may be an idea to transfer, it may not. That could be as little as £250. That brings it into the affordability scope of the vast majority of people who are affected by all this. You then go through the various different stages of executing that transaction, a more detailed look, stay put or move. You have to advise if you are going to move on the receiving product. So you charge based on that piece of advice. You then have to advise on what underlying investments that receiving product has, equities, gilts, it doesn't really matter. That has a discrete charging label as well. And then you have to provide the ongoing monitoring of whatever it is that you have provided the client with. That process and stripping out those charges into an item by item charging structure means that the end cost may be the same to an individual who's undertaken the whole transaction, but an individual who hasn't has paid a fraction of the amount of money they would otherwise have done in order to be comfortable that they should actually have stayed where they were in the first place. To me, that makes a great deal more sense. I think the FCA should go down this route, but I would say one final thing. I don't believe that organizations that cannot provide all four of those stages of that transactional process should be allowed to operate in this market. I think part of the problem has been the transfer and walk away, ditch the liabilities, it's somebody else's problem. That is not an appropriate mindset to bring to a professional advisory sector. And if you are saying to somebody, yes, I think it's the right advice is for you to transfer, here is the correct thing to transfer into, you own and keep that advice on your books and you stand by it 5 years, 10 years down the line. That's the only way to clear up the marketplace properly.